Okay, now we're fully ready. So I prepared so many questions for you. First, I'll do some introduction, and then we start, okay?
You bet.
Hi, everybody. This is Shift M Podcast, and our next episode, which we're delivering after quite a long delay, but this time our guest is David West. You definitely know who is David. He will make a quick introduction about himself, and then we're going to have a lot of questions for him. It should take about an hour, maybe a little bit more. So, David, thanks for coming, and the microphone is yours. Say a few words about yourself, please.
Hi, I'm a retired professor of computer science and business, and I have a background in cultural anthropology and Asian philosophy. If you see these three racks of books behind me are all Asian philosophy books. But living in southern Utah, it just snowed last night. I have known Igor for a long time, and it's been a very welcome partnership. So I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. We all know you for the books you wrote about object-oriented programming, but this time the podcast is about management and more global questions than programming. So I will try to ask you things which are not directly related to object-oriented programming, more about management and philosophy of software engineering, that kind of stuff. And I would like to start with the question, a simple one. Who did you vote for just a few days ago?
Voting in America is secret. No, I actually did not vote for either Biden nor Trump. I think that both of them are evil, and I am not a big fan of government. So I cast a protest vote.
Did you vote the last time, 4 years ago?
Vote for Trump? No, I would never vote for any. I would never vote for either of the two major candidates.
So you never voted in your life?
I voted, yes, but not for the Democrat or Republican candidates. My personal opinion, the biggest problem with the United States is the two-party system. The only thing worse is a one-party system. But no, neither side is good for the country. So
interesting. And do you think something is happening right now with the country, with the society, or it was like this always?
What you're seeing is a pushback. The country has always been far more conservative than people would like to believe. And by conservative, I don't mean racist and misogynistic. I mean, that they have a system of values that are not popular. Being religious, for instance. And the last, I don't know, since, for the last 15, 20 years, there has been a lot of governmental interference in these other ways of life. So right now, where I'm living, for example, is ranching and farming country. And the federal government is famous for coming in and telling these ranchers what they can and can't do with their land. And these are people that, have been doing this for generations. They know what they're doing. And so when the government comes in and says, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, it bothers them a lot. And so the 68 million people that voted for Trump are mostly that kind of group of people. They're just tired of being pushed around by the government. So it's a protest vote. None of these people like Trump. Most of them really think he's a terrible person, but they don't like government. So they're voting against government. They aren't voting for Trump. Yeah.
And what about tech
That-
people? What about tech people, programmers, engineers? How does this all affect us? What do you think? What is changing now in the tech world? Aside from farming.
yeah. Well, I think that the only good thing that might come from Biden with regard to technology is that in the United States, the internet has been given over to the rich people. So one of Trump's appointees, Ajit Pai, basically destroyed the Net Neutrality Act so that it allowed the big ISPs to charge more for whoever they wanted, and play favorites with technology. That'll go away under Biden, so that's a good thing. The lawsuit against Google will probably go away too, which is a bad thing. Google and Facebook and not Google and Amazon are not that bad. Facebook's got to go. So anyway, so no, technology is going to be given a free rein still for another 4 years. So
you think that these social networks, because you're saying Facebook is gonna go, so you think the social networks, which are now in charge of the personal information of everything we talk to each other, this is not a good thing, right? According to
no, it's not a good thing. The whole idea of like old newspapers and press and stuff is that you had a person who was responsible, an editorial, content, who could be held accountable if they did weird things. On the internet, you don't. In social media, you don't. You also don't have anybody that you can trust. The editor of a newspaper is someone who has a code of ethics. They police themselves to some degree. They try to be fair and so on. You can't say that about Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, he's not a good person. And so to have him in charge of the media content is not a good thing for anybody.
But are you in general in favor of more control over people's life or less control?
Oh, I'm absolutely less
Control. And if we talk about
Less.
management, if we move to a software world, people, let's say programmers, they work in a company, in a team. So you're in favor of what kind of management, where people are under strict control and rules and discipline, or when they more free, like now this agile idea, or flat organizations, democracy?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a double-edged sword. So if you go back to when Kent Beck first was writing about extreme programming, and he was basically saying, let us do our jobs, let us get rid of all of this oppressive management. We'll do the right thing, which is absolutely correct. But that comes with a cost. That if you're going to be given your freedom, you damn well better be responsible. So Kent was talking about you have to do continuous improvement of you as a person, as a programmer, as a team player, all these different kinds of things. And a lot of people, particularly in the programming world, don't have that set of skills. They were never taught how to work in a team. They were never I go to conferences and I ask people, what they read. And nothing. I mean, the programmers may read a manual here and there. There's a few of them that are enlightened and will listen to your podcast or read your books or read my books or whatever. But those are a very small minority. So those people, I mean, they don't deserve to be free. They aren't keeping up their half of the bargain. They aren't being responsible.
So what do we do with
But
those people, with the majority? Because the majority is irresponsible. You're right, definitely. So how the
Mhm.
management should deal with that situation?
There is a school of management. It's called servant leadership, where and it's very Taoist in practice, that you lead by following. I mean, this all sounds, very mystical and so on, but the management should itself adopt the role of, okay, I'm not in charge. I'm not forcing people to do this or forcing people to do that. I am setting an example of what would be good for them to do. I am very carefully aware and watching them, and I, will say good things to people who are doing the right thing, and say constructive things to people who are not doing the right thing. But it's uh, and then I go and make sure that people have what they need. This, if you look again, you look at Kent Beck stuff talking about coaching and contrast that with Scrum Master. A Scrum Master is a controller. A coach, the way that Kent Beck wrote about it, is one of these servant leaders. He's there to serve the team, not to control the team, not to run the team, but to help the team do what it needs to do. And there's a whole raft of books. My business management books are over there. But I could, I have a number of titles on my shelf about this kind of servant leadership, being supportive, being constructive, and getting rid of the control aspect. And it'll work. It'll take a lot longer time. So if you're a manager worrying about your quarterly performance review, it's not going to work for you. Yeah. But if you take a little bit longer view and say, what's going to be best for my company, my team, my division, a year from now, it'll make a huge difference.
Does it apply to all professions or only for tech people? This attitude of
all professions.
All professions.
Yes.
If you look at people who are doing, like, I don't know, people building houses or farmers or, I don't know, some other professions, they kind of, they always need some, I think, some control, some, I don't know, some force to kind of push them forward, because people, by definition, I think most of them are lazy and they don't really like to work. They like to do nothing. Maybe that's my understanding of, in general, people. There are exceptions, yes, of course, but in general, yes, people are not really happy to do the work.
So there's, you go back in the United States, a little bit more than that, probably 75, 80 years. This was an era of what was called scientific management. And the proponents of this scientific management had the view that you just said. People are generally lazy. This is a very classist approach. The people that were writing these books, of course, were professors and senior managers, and they thought that the blue collar worker was just, a lazy slug. And if you didn't control them, you were going to get crap. Well, that was wrong. I mean, that's just as wrong as just saying, oh, well, let's love everybody and let them do what they want and good things will happen. I mean, those are the two sides. You've got to find a balance in the middle. When you have something like building a house or building a dam or a bridge or something of this sort, that's where most of our current ideas about management come from. Is people have looked to these big engineering firms and said, oh, wow, look, they can put up a Three Rivers Dam in China in, 5 years, and it has billions of gallons of water and this and that. And, isn't this wonderful? Well, yes and no. You probably couldn't, well, I don't know. They'll say, well, you couldn't possibly have done this without doing this kind of command and control management. Well, the Egyptians built the pyramids. They didn't, they didn't have this stuff. But then also you have the case that we'll take building houses. And you have building houses, you have these big, large builders, and they'll go out and they'll put up, 100 houses, 300 houses a year. I mean, they build a lot of houses, and they have these very strict, rigid management things. They have deadlines. They have, this team does this, and then this team is going to be here 30 minutes later to do this, and it's all very coordinated and scheduled and so on. But the quality of those houses is crap. I mean, they're built to last 20 years, which is the length of a mortgage. And then they start falling apart. And they're hard to maintain. Sounds a little bit like software. You build something that's good enough to last until you get your next job, and then it all falls apart after you've left, because the quality's not there. Because you have to give people some integrity if you want really quality work out of them. You can't treat them as slaves. You can't treat them, as cogs in a machine. They're people.
Do you know that currently the situation on the market is that we need more and more programmers? The demand is growing and growing, and most countries cannot supply that amount of programmers right now. So if you look at especially European countries, I'm not sure about America, but if you look at European countries, they have like double the size of the demand is double the size of the supply of young programmers on the market. And at the same time, the salaries for programmers growing every year, much faster than the growth of economy, much faster than any other profession. So it looks, many people say that now is the market of programmers, not the market of companies, not the market of projects, but market of programmers. So programmers dictate the rules. Programmers tell their employers what to do and how the projects will be run. So in this situation, don't you think that giving even more freedom to programmers could be dangerous, strategically? Because they're already in charge. They already get too much.
Oh, they already get too much. This is for sure. Okay. You are absolutely right that there is this huge demand, but at the same time, if you go and you look at what management is saying about all of this kind of stuff, they aren't happy. They're really not happy. And the biggest reason that they're not happy is that they're spending all of this money and they aren't getting any return on that investment. You look at the IT budget of these companies, and it's huge. It's a huge amount of money. But you look at what that budget goes for, 80% of it, 80% of the IT budget for big companies goes to maintenance, keeping stuff running that, if it was written well in the first place, it would, software doesn't wear out. Why do you need maintenance? Because it was crap. And this isn't sustainable. You get to the point where you're spending so much of your money just to keep the IT up and running, that it becomes a real problem for management. So you look at business experts. Kotter, Kotter, he's from Harvard, and he writes a lot about management. And he is one of many who are talking right now that IT is the biggest impediment. Not only do they not get anything from IT, but IT is holding them back from doing what they need and want to do as a business. And so this burgeoning market for programmers is going to disappear pretty quick when these companies start saying, "Oh, we've got to find an alternative. We've got to find something different." And they won't look to the IT professionals to find it. You know, they don't trust IT management any more than the programmers trust IT management. You know, IT management, this big, huge group in the middle, is they're a threatened species, I think.
These maintainability problems, I think, are coming from what, for example, you were talking in your book in Object Thinking, that they're coming from the lack of structure in the heads of programmers. So programmers just think differently. They have no clear idea of what they're doing, and that's why they create all this unmaintainable code, which they get money for, but then they walk away, and some other programmers join the team, and they need to deal with this mess, and the amount of mess is growing, and this legacy software is everywhere. And you're absolutely right. We only maintain what other people created before. So maybe we need to be more strict to programmers, give them less freedom. I'm just philosophically asking.
Yes, and okay. I'll have to be a little bit philosophical here for a minute. There is, all of this huge billions and trillions and quadrillions of lines of code out there are not good. It's stuff that programmers, each with their own style, idiosyncratic ways of doing things, have built all of this stuff, and it doesn't work together nicely. It doesn't do anything else. So you could say, okay, well, what we need to do is we need to impose structure. We'll have everybody write in a single language. We'll pick Java just for fun. And nobody can write any programs anymore except in Java. And it has to be Java version 17.2. Can't be earlier or later. It has to be just 17.2, period. And we're going to create a manual of style like they do for language, for natural language, for English, for instance. We'll have a Strunken White manual, or we'll have a Roget's Thesaurus and a Webster's Dictionary. And if you don't conform to those, your code doesn't get accepted. Okay. You could do that. It's not going to work, because the problem is deeper than that. The problem comes from a fundamental flaw in the whole idea of programming in general. So if you go back to the Turing computer, the Turing machine, very simple device, read-write head, and an infinite tape of ones and zeros. And your program and your data is all stored on that tape. Well, it's infinite. And this means that not only is there a one way of writing a program so that it adds 2 + 2 = 4, there's actually an infinite number of ways of writing a program that 2 + 2 = 4. And there's an infinite number of ways of doing it wrong. 2 + 2 comes up with 5, 7, 57, 42, whatever. I mean, there's an infinite number of ways of doing that wrong. And there is no objective way of saying this way is better than that way. You can come up with criteria that says, oh, well, over here I did it in 1 line of code, and over here I did it in 10 lines of code. Well, okay, what does that prove? Not much. Maybe this 1 line of code was APL, which nobody can read. And this 10 lines of code was Smalltalk, which is a really cool language. It's a lot of fun to play with. It's an arbitrary conclusion. And so you have no objective way of saying this is a good way to write a program, this is a bad way of writing a program. So how are you going to come up with those style manuals? How are you going to come up with the libraries of things that are going to work? I mean, we've been trying this for 75 years. and it doesn't work. And so we take programming at this level, and we say, well, we can't decide anything at this level, so we'll build something on top of it. We'll build a framework on top of it. And now you have to write in this framework, and that imposes a little bit of discipline, but you still have, you know, the fringe cases and the exceptions and things of this sort. So then you put something else on top of that. And then you say, oh, well, this is actually kind of hard for people to do. Programmers aren't very bright. And, you know, we need to control them, and we need to do something else. So we'll put this management tool on top of that. And then we'll put some kind of process management tool on top of that. And so you keep doing this. And so today, to be a programmer, you can't be a programmer. I can't go out and write COBOL, you know, which is the first language I ever learned, COBOL and assembler. I can't write a COBOL program today. I have to be a full stack developer. I have to go into Eclipse or IntelliJ or something of this sort. And I have to use Jira, and I have to use this, and I have to use that. And I'm probably using a framework of some sort or another. And all of it just adds more arbitrary complexity to the whole thing. So you're building a Jenga tower that's going to collapse. And we've already seen examples of that. You've heard the case of the, you know, when the 3 lines of code that broke the internet.
I'm not sure I remember. Can you tell about it?
Okay. Yeah. So there was a guy, he was Eastern European, or his name was at least. I don't know him. So, but his name was Eastern European. But he wrote a bit of code called left pad. And it was like 4 or 5 lines of code. And he put it out there in one of these open source libraries. And then he got into a dispute with the people that had that library up. They wanted him to change a name or do something, and he didn't want to. And so he took his code down. He just removed it from the library. And within hours, Netflix, I can't remember, but a number of, I think it was even Facebook, but a whole bunch of these big programs all of a sudden crashed because they had wrote the program that used this library and used this framework, which used this library, which used this framework, which ultimately used left pad. Left pad wasn't there anymore, out there in these open source directories. And so all the software built on top of it crashed. Now they, and what they did to resolve that is that the company that owned the library, the open source library, put the code back over the author's objection, because all these big companies, were putting pressure on, we've got to have this code, we've got to have this code. And so they did they stole this guy's work from him, took it away from him and gave it to all these big companies just to keep things running, which is not a very nice thing to do. I mean, you wouldn't like people stealing your work, I don't think.
Yeah, that's for sure. But it's an interesting story. But you know what they say now, and I also feel that because I was a programmer also like some time ago. But I remember when I was a kid and I was in school, then it was actually possible for me to kind of see all the problems which computers have, because there were so few computers and there were so few problems. But now it's almost impossible to be a programmer everywhere. You need to be more, niche programmer. If you're the Java programmer, then you know very little about databases, for example. Or if you're Java, you know very little about networking and so on and so forth. So now it seems that the total area, the domain of programming, of computer science is getting so big that it's necessary to, to build this pyramid, like you said, this pyramid of dependencies. When I just work on this level, on this layer, and I don't care what's beneath me, I just rely on this layer, and I don't know how this layer works, and I don't want to know. So I go up and up and up, and then people start creating these domain-specific languages. Probably you've heard about them, like languages which are very specific for very small problem to solve. And some programmers, they only learn this language. And if you ask them how this language works, they don't have an answer. They don't know what's beneath, like how it goes down to bytes and bits and all that stuff. So some people say it's good. Some people say it's good that we are becoming, less smart, probably because we don't see the full pyramid, and programmers are becoming more like a commodity profession. Like we just train you to use this domain-specific language. You're the programmer, and that's enough. So you don't need to be really a scientist. You don't need to understand deep. So that's what's going on now. And what do you think about it?
Well, excuse me. So you can build this complexity. You can achieve results. You could probably, if you did this in a really disciplined fashion, if you really forced programmers to toe the line and follow the standards and things of this sort, you could build really, really, really good programs. Does that mean that you solved the problem for the business? No. There still is. If you go into computer science departments, there are still people getting PhDs in how to prove that a program is correct. Mathematically prove that this program is correct. And yeah, okay, that's nice. You can prove that yes, this program works and will always work and will never fail, and is the most efficient algorithm and takes up the least CPU time and so on and so forth. But so what? We're talking about management. I'm a management, and I've got a problem over here. I've got to process these customers, or I've got to deal with this business issue. And it's a problem for me to get that done. Okay. And I give it to you as a good software engineer, and you come back and you write a program and you say, this program is right. It fits standards. It conforms to all of these kinds of things. And the manager looks at you and says, yeah, but it doesn't solve my problem. Now that's where the real issue is, and that's what's getting really worse, is that the manager lives in a complex world, and it's a large world. I mean, it's a global world. So you're building these large scale, complex systems. These systems have to be adaptable. They have to respond to change, very rapid kind of change. And it creates a really interesting set of problems. The programmer, he's living over here in this nice formal world, the computer. I mean, the computer has rules. It's all nice and clear and cut. The program can't deal with ambiguity. Everything has to be black and white in the computer. And so you become a master of this mechanical world over here. And it doesn't matter how good you get at building machines. What the business person, what the manager needs is he needs something like a really intelligent human being. Someone who can deal with complexity, who can deal with ambiguity, who can fill in between the lines, all these things that a computer can't do. And don't tell me that AI is going to solve that, because it's not. But you've got a mismatch. A long time ago, we used to talk about the impedance mismatch between objects and databases, relational databases. Oh, I can do all this really wonderful things over here in objects. But then if my objects have to talk to a relational database, all of a sudden it takes 4 times as long to write a program as it did before, because they're 2 different philosophical worlds. They're 2 different kinds of domains. So I will, when we're done talking, I'll send you a link to, it's just a short little book. It was put out by Carnegie Mellon. It's called, anyhow, it's about building complex adaptive systems, large-scale complex adaptive systems. This was, it was Carnegie Mellon University was commissioned to do this study. Carnegie Mellon is where the Software Engineering Institute that's responsible for all the standards and stuff for software engineering is located. The study was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, so that's not necessarily a good thing. But they were looking at what are the challenges and what are the problems of these large-scale adaptive systems, complex adaptive systems. And they basically came to the conclusion that that everything we know about software engineering is not going to help us, because it's a different world. This world of complexity and so on is a very different world. It's like a biological world. So everything we know about machines doesn't tell us diddly about growing a plant or creating an animal or creating an intelligent human being. It doesn't tell us any of that stuff. And so it's very interesting reading. It's very worthwhile reading, and it's very short. But it lays out this philosophical problem of programmers and software engineers and computer scientists live in a world that is totally apart from the world that the business lives in and business management lives in. And the 2 aren't compatible. So you're going to have to invent a new bridge. That, by the way, is what I'm currently trying to do, is to invent this new bridge. So book number 3 will be on that.
And that's really interesting. And that leads me to the next question. How do you think managers should understand who is a good programmer, who is not a good programmer, who is high performer, who is low performer? By what? By lines of code, by bytes, by, probably you're going to say by the amount of business problems they solve. But usually programmers, they're staying quite far away from actual business problems, even though we think and we hope that programmers going to in the end solve those business problems. But in reality, if you look at the real projects, programmers are basically still writing lines of code, and they're dealing with objects and classes, not with real life problems. And then eventually somehow this connection happens, this bridge you're talking about. But if I'm a manager and I have a team of 5 programmers and I deal with real programming, so how do I, what is the right way to measure the performance of these people? Because there are many opinions about this. Some people say that we need to use like explicit metrics and basically count lines of code. Some people say that completely just get away from all metrics and don't measure people by numbers. So where are you standing in this?
So let's go back in history. Let's go back to 1975. And let's listen to a guy named James Martin. So James Martin is one of the largest names in the 70s, writing about computing and about what we would call IT, about business computing, things of this sort. He is also a big proponent of databases. He was the leading proponent of a transition from what was functional programming, or not functional, but procedural programming, to data-based kind of programming. The idea was that, procedures, the way we do things changes, but the data stays the same. The data is more stable. And so he was a big advocate of this data-centric approach to doing things. But he also considered, and he was looking at this problem of management. How do you deal with teams and so on? And the first thing he said was, well, you've got to get rid of the human resources department and the compliance department, because human resources is there to make sure that everybody is treated fairly. And so they do things like they say, oh, you're a programmer 1, you're a programmer 2, you're a programmer 3. And your wage has to be based on your job category, not what you do, but your job category. And you can't come in and say, oh, this person is much more efficient or much more productive than this person over here. Let's give him twice the salary. You can't do that, because human resources is no. They're, you either have to promote them up to a programmer 15, which doesn't exist, or you have to pay him the same as everybody else. So that's number one. You have to get rid of that kind of mindset. Okay. The second thing is that you look at a guy named Robert Glass, who was also writing in this period of time. And he has a bunch of things that he wrote about productivity and management and things of this sort. And it's a very known fact. I mean, this has been true from pretty much from day one, that the individual difference between programmers can be as high as 100 to 1. This programmer over here can be 100 times more productive and effective than this person over here. We know that, and we've known that from day one. But we aren't allowed to acknowledge that. So James Martin in 1975, he proposed, SWAT teams. He says, identify take a group of programmers, put them, give them their own little special office over here, with closed doors instead of cubicles. Give them a coffee machine, give them a popcorn machine, make their work nice. And then, let them basically manage themselves. This is the same thing Kent Beck said 25 years later. Let them manage themselves. But make it all very, very public, so that just like in Scrum and in XP, you have these charts up on the wall that shows what everybody's doing and what's effective. And you can walk into a room and you can look around and you can say, oh, every pair that has broken the build had Dave in it. If Dave wasn't in the pair, they never broke the build. Well, that means Dave's got to go. And this is stuff that we all know kind of tacitly, but we're too polite to ever say anything. But if it's sitting up there on the wall and it's public, even Dave, he's going to look up there and says, I better start looking for another line of work. I'm holding this team back, assuming that I'm honest a little bit, with myself. And so this is how you don't really measure. Well, you're measuring productivity, but in terms of business value. Did the customer, is the customer using your work? Are they happy about it? Do they send little notes down to the manager saying, hey, your team really came through for me this week? And then you gradually add things in, we added business value and it only took us 6 weeks instead of 6 months. So you start building from that and coming up with these alternative metrics. And I forget now, Kent Beck has at least one paper that he wrote that suggested the metrics that should be used for an agile or for an XP team, to judge their productivity and rate. And they were not the same things that Scrum uses. The Scrum metrics are not that good, I don't think. But
You said that we are too polite right now to demonstrate people their metrics and to, like you said, to let our HR department pay them different money for people who are 100 times more performance, so pay them 100 times more money than other people. And this is kind of gets me back to the start of our discussion. So we are now too polite, but maybe we're too polite only for the tech people, only in the area of tech people. Because if you look at the, let's say, farmers, or you look at the people who build houses, we're not too polite to them because we are working with them for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we show them the metrics and we show them how much they make every day, and we're not being too polite. So maybe something is wrong with the tech industry right now. This politeness is kind of damaging us a little bit, no?
yes. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was a huge movement in software, the quality movement, and software quality. Lots of conferences, lots of journals, things of this sort. And the idea was that we needed to deal with this kind of thing. The software we're building is really bad and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So we need to improve quality. And there were two very different kinds of schools of thought. And this is in the management press. This isn't in software necessarily. One of them was Six Sigma. The idea of imposing all of these kinds of controls so that we are correct or we do things down to, Six Sigma, level of quality. We have one failure in every, 100,000, whatever Six Sigma comes out to be. Well, the other one was in the United States, at least, and was never quite as popular, was the Malcolm Baldrige approach to doing things. Malcolm Baldrige was a government official, but he also was a business manager, MBA kind of person, wrote a lot about management. And Baldrige talked about this need for openness and transparency. Because with Six Sigma, you're not doing anything at all to expose or to make public or to hold people accountable. You're trying to make the process as a substitute for the people. Well, Malcolm Baldrige did the exact opposite. And he did a lot of work, or a lot of people did work following his approach in education. So they would go into a grade school classroom. So this is not software. This is an average grade school classroom. And what they would do is that they would put up on the wall, it was oftentimes anonymous. You didn't put names up on the wall, but you'd put up all the grades for an assignment or all the course grades for this, this term. They would be up on the wall in various ways. You'd put people's work, actual work up on the walls. Take their name off of it, put the work up on the wall so that all the kids in this classroom are seeing all of this stuff. And again, it's not telling them anything they didn't know. It's making it public. So when I was a teacher, I would sit in the class and I would give out team assignments. Team assignments are horribly unpopular at the university because the university is built on individual competition. There's only so many A's and everybody wants their A. So you're always out so you give a team assignment and say, okay, everybody on the team is going to get the same grade. Boy, do students hate that. I mean, they really, really hate that. But you give them that assignment and the students in the team, they know exactly who is contributing to the team effort, who is just kind of slacking and riding along because they know that they're going to get the same grade, so they don't have to really work hard. I mean, they know this. Okay, so when I would give team assignments, I would also have them do something that, posted each individual effort so that I could see as the project was going forward, I could see, oh, this person checked in this person did that, this person did that. And just making it public, everybody performed better. You didn't have slackers. I mean, because they didn't want to be embarrassed. And you know, if it's quiet, if it's tacit, they don't get embarrassed. But if it's public, they do. So yeah, transparency is really important. And getting rid of this politeness is really important.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And what do you think? A little shifting a little bit more to the personality of programmers. Who do you think is what is it for you, a talented programmer, and who is, you know, lacking talent? How would you define that talent of programmers, of programming?
So again, when I was, I'll go back to the days that I was teaching, which is when I had not only had to try to recognize talented programmers, I had to give them grades, you know, fair grades. And so the kind of skills that a talented programmer would have is that, number one, they would have at least one interest outside of programming. They'd be musicians. They would be hobbyists, like the maker movement, you know, people that like to build things with their hands. Maybe they would even be a potter, or they would be something else, but they would have some interest other than programming. They probably were fairly well read. You know, they would read fiction, they would read books on science, or they would read other kinds of things. You know, not as much as I do, but they would at least read these different kinds of things. And so when they would sit down with something, they would sit down and they would have a problem they had to solve, but they didn't have a single way of doing it. The kind of formal logic puzzles that are given oftentimes as tests for programmers before you hire them. You know, Google is famous for doing this kinds of things, you know, these logic puzzles. Well, these people would sit down and they could probably do most of those logic puzzles, but they also said, you know, I was reading this last week in this other area, and that gives me the idea, that gives me a metaphor. You know, it doesn't give me the answer, but it suggests a different way of looking at how the problem might be solved. So they have this kind of breadth of understanding outside of programming that gives them perspective, that gives them the ability to see things, to analyze it, look at what's there with an open mind a little bit, and discover. This might be an interesting way of approaching this problem.
And let's say you are the manager, you have a team of programmers, let's say 10 people, and you clearly see that only 2 of them are actually talented and the rest of them are not really that much talented and interested. Is it possible what would you do? You would try to fix these 8 people, or you would try to change them to different people?
I would try to motivate them to improve themselves. So you can't do anything to another person. You know, you look at the world of addiction or alcoholism or something like this. You know, you can't fix an alcoholic. They have to get to the point where they're ready to fix themselves. It's the same thing with programmers. If you come in with a programmer and you say, you point out, look, this is really a cool way that this was done over here. And you provide constructive criticism. Well, did you think about doing this kind of thing? What would you do if you had to do it this way instead of that way? I mean, you ask these kinds of open-ended questions, and if they don't respond to them, they aren't ready to be a good programmer. And so you use your 30-day probationary period, you get rid of them and bring in somebody new who is. I mean, if you think about it, and if you are willing to give yourself some time as a manager of programmers, you can say, okay, right now we need 1,000 programmers in this shop because the way things are done and because of the hole that we've dug ourselves into. Well, if I had 100 programmers who are all like Igor, we could do, we could get all the work done and probably at a higher level of quality and everything else. So I sit there and I said, my goal this year is to take my 1,000 programmers and reduce them down to 100. And I tell them, I says, this is the goal, is that we want people who have this skill set, this kind of knowledge, this kind of breadth of understanding, this kind of quirky way of thinking, this way of working cooperatively with each other. And you say, at the end of the year, 100 of you are going to be here, and you're all going to earn, 5 times what you're making now, which, will make the IT manager happy because I'm still cutting his budget significantly. But, it's up to you. You change. This is the goal. This is the objective. This is what you have to be as a person. And then I could set a bunch of independent goals. So I had a program at New Mexico Highlands, the last university that I was teaching. It was an apprenticeship program. And I actually had the opportunity to apply a lot of these different kinds of rules and so on. We had people come into this program. They weren't cherry picked. We had one kid come into the program with his girlfriend, his pregnant girlfriend. This was his 3rd child by the 3rd different woman. He was 20 years old. He did not know how to do cut and paste. I mean, he literally couldn't go into a word processing program and do cut and paste. And this is in September. So in January, he was leading a team. He was teaching them how to use the J2EE framework. We were writing production code for the state engineer's office. It was a system that they had set off to China or somewhere and came back and didn't work, of course. And so his team was doing this, and he was teaching these people how to use the J2EE framework and Java in 6 months. So, I mean, this stuff works. This stuff really works. But in that class, in addition to doing their programming assignments, they also had, we did this kid in particular, he did a really cool review of a movie called Hero. Hero is one of these kung fu kind of movies out of China, lots of color pageantry and people flying through the air and slicing swords and so on. But the hero of the movie is he wants to assassinate this warlord. And he gets to the point where he can, in fact, assassinate this warlord, but then he chooses not to because they are looking at a piece of calligraphy and the warlord is explaining the meaning of this calligraphy. And the guy says, oh, this isn't somebody I want to kill. But anyway, this kid was the only one in the class that did that movie review and got the point of the movie correctly. We had writers' workshops. So people had to write material, but then they sat in a group and they critiqued each other's work. Just like if, I don't know if you've ever been to a PLOP conference, PLOP conference, but it's pattern languages of programming. And it's based around a writer's workshop. Instead of being a competitive conference, you submit a paper and then everybody critiques and helps you make the paper better. in this technique called a writer's workshop. Well, we did that kind of thing. In 1 year, we had 20-something students in that first year. 12 of them had papers accepted at peer review conferences. Like at that time it was OOPSLA, and the first couple of years of the Agile conference in the US. Both of those conferences had better than an 80% rejection rate. So they rejected 80 some odd percent of the papers that were submitted to them. Well, I had 12 students that got papers accepted to those conferences. And the room was like an Agile room. We had hard floors, roller chairs, islands with, computer workstations. But you'd sit there and you'd watch these people during the day, and they'd be working on this code over here, and they would run into a problem, and they would, all of a sudden they're sliding their chair across the floor and talking to this other person over here who they know, has better skills than they do, or can answer the question for them. And there's all this freedom and movement around the room. And it worked really, really well. And I think you could do the same thing in a business setting, but it takes a manager who's not into command and control, and it takes people who are willing to work. Now, these kids were motivated twice. Number one, they were getting paid for their work, but only if the customer accepted it. And they were getting a grade. They were going to get a degree. And so they had the motivation to do something. Maybe that's what you should do with your programmers. You should have your programmers and say, oh, well, if you have met these kinds of goals, your salary is going to go up 5%. If you haven't, it's going to go down 5%.
HR will not allow me to do that.
That's true.
Now we're getting to a very interesting question. We're talking about talented programmers, and I'm sure you agree that talented programmers and talented individuals, they usually have their own individual thinking, and they have their own ideas and concepts. And you know what happens to people who read your book, and then they read my books, and they start writing code this way, they in most cases get fired. And that's what's happening on the market, because the majority, the mainstream Java development and all other object-oriented development, it's going one way. And when they read the alternative way, even though this way may look better, and it is, I believe it is better, but when they start to apply this thinking in their daily work, then very often they write me emails about that. I know these stories.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes they get fired. Sometimes they don't have any chance to get a job, because when they mention your name or sometimes my name on the interview, the hiring manager immediately says, okay, we know these stories, bye-bye. This is not the way object-oriented programming works. So what's your advice? What to do to these young people who are who want to stay, in companies? They want to make money, but at the same time, they have their own thinking.
Yeah. This is a real problem, and it's not just a problem with management and within the IT world. It's a problem with the social structure. So way back when I first started teaching objects, so this is 1991-92. I would tell my students, I says, this is the right way of doing things. This is a good way of doing it. This is a really, really fun way of doing things. And they would see that. And then I would say, you're going to have a huge problem convincing management, when you leave the school and you go out and you get your job. Actually, most of these people already had jobs because that was a requirement to get into my program. But, when you go back to the office on Monday, you're going to encounter all of these kinds of resistance. And I says, the only real way you're going to get something done is that, pick out 3 or 4 of your friends in this class that are good, that have really, figured this stuff out and are doing it right. Form your own little company and start doing things and, be the entrepreneur, or, and you don't even have to be like today's people where they want to make, an IPO and sell out and be a billionaire. But just start your own company where the 4 or 5 of you are doing what you want to do, the way you want to do it well, and and pretty soon someone's going to notice, and you get enough people doing this kind of thing. But that doesn't work because you've got kids at home, you've got a wife that wants, a new Mercedes, you know you most cultures in the world are not cooperative. Something like this might work in China, and probably is working in China without us knowing about it. But in the West, with our individualism and it just doesn't work. I mean, the social pressures are against it. So no, I don't know. I don't have really good advice for people. I know that most of them are unhappy or unemployed. They're employed and unhappy, or they're unemployed. And it's sad. I mean, it's really a bad problem, and I don't know what to do about it. Except, again, right now I've decided to quit talking to the IT world for the most part. I am focusing my efforts on business management, because if I can show them that, oh, there is a better way, there is an easier way of doing things, they'll fire their IT management and hire a whole bunch of people like you and I, to do this work for them. But that's where the key is. I mean, that's where the money is. So that's who has to be convinced, is the business management. And it's not going to be that hard. Business, if you look at the business press and the management press, the books and stuff that people in that field have been written, and the journal articles and so on, they've been talking about agility and chaos since the 1980s. The software world didn't start doing this stuff until after 2000. So you have to learn to talk their language, put it in, here's the business case for doing things this way. Here's what you're going to gain as a business. And, I mean, I don't know if it's going to work any better than the stuff I did for software, but that's where my efforts are, is that, because that's who needs to be convinced, the people with the money.
And my next question is probably related to this one. So what's your motivation for writing books? Why do you do this, aside from money? But I don't think there's a lot of money there, but still, what's your primary?
No. The biggest motivation, just like it is with teaching, when I was teaching a class, I have 100 people go through my classes every semester. And if one of them is up and says, wow, this is the best class I ever took. Wow, this is the best book I ever read. I mean, yeah, it's 10 people. And it's not going to be the bestseller list, but it's enough. It's enough.
So you care about what's going to happen after, or this is your joy, this is your fun, that understanding that some people may get out of your semester and say,
yeah, it's so my motivation for writing the book is the people that come and says, yeah, this this mattered, this made a difference to me as a person. And then letting them know that, yeah, I'm there, I'm really happy that this helped. Go out, try to do it, try to apply it. When you have problems, send me questions and stuff. I mean, I'm always open to receiving these kinds of things. So I get a sense of engagement with people. and I can kind of share their suffering. I can share their joy when they have a success or whatever. I mean, we're talking about motivation. There is a part of me that also would like to change the world. You know, I really would like to find that lever and change the world for the better.
You did actually a lot.
I hope so. You know, the company that I was co-founded in Netherlands, you know, before COVID sent me home. That was our mission statement, was to change the world. And so we were doing things with small talk. We were doing things with pure objects in terms of the products and stuff we were developing. We also only would work with companies that were engaged in making the world a better place. So our first client was a company called Sea Rangers, which is a nonprofit company. And they are basically building ships and teaching people marine biology and conservation and all these kinds of skills. And then they go out and they work with governments to kind of monitor what's going on in the oceans. They also provide services like maintenance, offshore windmill farms and things of this sort. But I mean, they're committed to making a real difference in the world. They are not just making a profit. There's a whole group of people, they're called B corporations, the letter B, B Corp. And these are companies that, like Patagonia, the people that make the outerwear, the hiking outerwear and so on, that their mission statement is to make the world a better place. You know, conservation, or to make the world a better place with people. There's another whole thing again in the management area. They're called teal organizations. The book was Reinventing the Organization, and it's about how you build companies that have empowered employees that work collaboratively together instead of competitively together. That decision making is pushed down to, you know, the employee level instead of being isolated up at the management level. So working with these kinds of companies is another way of making a difference. And you will also find that those kinds of companies are really open to some of these other ideas we've talked about, you know, today. You know, servant leadership, empowered employees, letting people self-manage to some degree or another, and they have mechanisms in place that support that. So that's another thing I would give as advice. You know, is quit working for who you're working for, and find one of these people, you know, and go to work for them. A lot of these people, since they're not totally profit motivated, you may take a salary cut, you know, 10%, 20%, something like that. But, you know, you'll get it back eventually. Plus the fact you'll have a whole lot more fun working.
That makes sense. And I actually want to ask you about the book, because sometimes I recommend to these people who are really interested in pursuing the idea of the proper object orientation in programming, and actually think about also publishing something. Maybe not a book as a big work, but maybe publishing some articles or speaking at conferences. So making ideas more public. And that way, it's easier to defend them in front of your team, which is, you know, quite conservative and don't accept new ideas. So do you think it's a good strategy in general?
Yes. Can you edit this out? I've got to let my dog out.
Okay.
Sorry about that. No, yes, you have to, you know, be bold. You have to tell people what you believe. You have to show people what works, or what has worked for you, and not be shy about it. So publishing papers, articles, trying to speak at conference, organizing conferences. All of these things are very worthwhile, and I would recommend them. That they can be difficult for people to do. User group. So one of the things that we did with objects back when I was first starting this stuff, and before the book, is that we founded a object technology user group in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is where I was teaching at the time. And at first it was just people getting together and talking about this, but also talking about how they were doing it at work and things of this sort. We organized a conference, Current Object Practice and Experience Conference in '94. And we invited everybody. We had Rebecca Wurst-Brock, we had Richard Gabriel, we had Kent Beck, we had Ward Cunningham, we had, anybody who was anybody except Grady Booch, and Ivar Jacobson turned us down. They wouldn't come. But everybody else who had written books or whatever came to this conference and were speakers at the conference. But half of the conference was just people from companies saying, oh, wow, this is what we were doing with objects. We had a company from Texas that came in and showed us how they had to write code for a micro switch, with like a 10 millisecond switching budget. That was their time budget. And they had two teams, one of them writing in Smalltalk and one of them writing in C++. Well, the Smalltalk team finished their program in 6 months. The C++ team was still working a year and a half later and never did finish. But the problem was, well, how is Smalltalk ever going to make this time budget? Well, they wrote the program, got it to work, got it to do what it was supposed to have to do, and then they did a little trick. They pre-compiled the methods. So instead of sending a message to an object and have the object ask the class for a copy of it and so on, they just did that pre-compilation. So the message went to the object and the response came back immediately, and they were able to do their time budget just with a simple little trick. But those are the kinds of things that really inspire people. And yeah, it's cool to stand in front of 500 people and have your ideas acknowledged and stuff. I highly recommend it.
Okay, that's great. We're a little bit running out of time. So my last question is, what is happiness for you? How would you define that?
What do I define as happiness?
Yes.
Yeah. Having enough, so that I'm not worried or constantly, wondering or caring or concerned about where my next sandwich is going to come from or whatever. But having friends, having enough. I don't need to be an influencer with 10,000 or 10 million, Facebook friends or whatever. I have a couple dozen high quality friends like yourself. That's enough. So happiness for me is enough. Having enough.
Okay, that sounds like a great answer. Thank you very much for the talk. It was really.
Thank you for the invitation. I hope we're entertaining for your listeners.
Definitely. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye, David.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.